Blood on the Clocktower's most hated character, the Butler. Blood on the Clocktower is a unique social deduction game known for its very large roster of quirky characters, and today we're going to get into Blood on the Clocktower's most universally hated character, the Butler. Let's cast our minds back to a time in the early Sydney scene, when playing Blood on the Clocktower was considered playtesting, and the Fangu changed 4 times because I kept finding new stupid things to complain about. We would often complain about the Butler, and in fact this is a picture of Stephen Medway trying to avoid people's complaints about the Butler. And by we I mean me, and by complain I mean endlessly roast Stephen Medway with an internal lambasting of memes. But I think No Rules Pod sums it up nicely.
It's like Werewolf, but instead of just a few players getting fun powers, everyone gets a fun power. Unless you're the Butler. The Butler.
So, what is wrong with the Butler? First, an opportunity for players to cheat the system. If a Butler selects a master across the circle from them, the storyteller either cannot confirm both their hands are up at the same time, or if they do look behind them when taking their votes, which they would ordinarily not need to, it confirms the Butler's identity. The same goes for just outlandishly intentionally voting against the ability, daring the storyteller to do something about it, which is worse. Secondly, if the storyteller isn't closely monitoring how you're voting, you can do whatever you want, and you effectively have no ability. Wasn't Blood on the Clocktower's main draw that everyone has a unique character? And lastly, voting is supposed to be the one thing that you do freely, and as the Butler, you only do this freely dead. This makes the Butler a self-execution risk character, where oftentimes campaigning for your own execution is the optimal strategy to prove that you are good, which is a problem that the Recluse has as well. While I'm alive, I'm a detriment to the good team, I'm better off being dead, and the Butler has the same problem. But okay, Keith, you beautiful genius, how do we fix the Butler? Well, let's attempt to address each part of the criticism. If your playgroup consists of players that are going to try and cheat and steal, well, the rulebook for Love Letter says it best. We suggest you don't play with knaves who cheat at fun, light games. Which is one of my favorite rulebook entries of all time. But to fix our next issue is an interesting one. And honestly one that we probably should have been doing from the start. Using the Grimoire to track nominations. Here's my suggestion. The small discs that you use to mark the night sheet, pips, make for excellent note-taking devices. You can use this to track if a player has voted or not. You can use it to track how many votes a particular player has at the time. And you can use it to track which player is slated for execution, which if you've storytold a lot of Blood on the Clocktower or been at a lot of events, often it's really easy to forget. Especially when there's 7 or 8 rounds of nominations and voting. And it makes it easier to follow if the Butler has voted correctly or not, because you will see who has voted when in each round. And the original advice for dealing with the Butler was to gently remind the player that they had made a mistake, which this makes tracking that easier too. And if players think that you're watching the votes closer, then they're less likely to try and game the system. But to fix our last issue, we have to change what the Butler does. And many people have suggested their take on it, so here's my homebrew Butler fix for those bent on changing what it does. Each night, choose a master. If you vote differently from them, the demon learns their character. Now what does this do differently? The Butler is suddenly worrying about accidentally being an informant, and in the early game must find players to trust, who they can vote with. And if they choose to not vote with them, the penalty is the demon will learn their character. Now imagine being the demon, and waking up being told who the fortune teller is because the Butler betrayed their master. That's huge. But if you choose an evil player as your master, and you betray them, the evil team gains nothing. And in the final days, you can vote freely, because the demon learning who someone in the final 3 is means nothing. Now, how do you run this? Well, remember, I literally just told you about how we can use the Grimoire to track nominations and votes and executions, and this is a fantastic time to really put that to use. If you're tracking votes, you can actively see if the Butler is defying their master or not, and you can use a reminder token to track if you have to give the demon that information. But finally, in defense of the Butler. Now, a lot of my criticisms of the Butler come from an understanding of when we were playing the game that it was playtesting. I'm talking early on. And I'm a board game designer, and in participating in testing, suggestions or pointing out issues is common. And it was frustrating to see something that I thought was broken be left unfixed. However, now, coming back to the game after a break for the pandemic, the game is clearly not in a playtesting space. And I wanted to share a bit of an anecdote that changed my thinking about how stuff like this should be done. I ran a playtest of a social deduction game that I had designed at a convention. And on the first day after a night's info, someone turned to the player who was the bad guy, the demon equivalent, and said, "Hey, you're the bad guy." And they go, "Well, yeah," because they didn't know what they were supposed to do. They didn't know what options they had. And a lot of people were left with a weird feeling that the game didn't work because they didn't understand how it was supposed to be played. Now, I was frustrated as a person who understood how the game was supposed to work, how it was supposed to function mechanically, and what different pieces of information meant and how different alibis would work. But as a first-time player, they felt that they had no options and they gave up. Now, I've come around to the thought that the Butler is the same thing. It has a single job. Make a friend that you can trust to vote together as a unit. Now, that doesn't seem obvious looking at it, because it seems like the Butler is taking something from you in its ability. But I've actually got good memories of games where I've played as the Butler, or I've bluffed as the Butler. And maybe it will just take time for people to find a comfortable space in the meta for the Butler where it will shine.